On the evening of February 12, 1986, the air in the 3rd Precinct of the New Orleans Police Department was thick with the smells of stale coffee and damp paperwork. For Officer Lauren Brooks, it was the satisfying end to another grueling shift. She was 26, with a reputation for being sharper and more tenacious than officers twice her age, a fact reflected in the neat stacks of case files on her desk. The hum of the fluorescent lights was a familiar lullaby, the rhythmic clatter of typewriters a comforting beat. An ordinary evening, indistinguishable from hundreds before it. As she finished her final report, a message slip from dispatch caught her eye. It was simple, almost an afterthought. Bailiff Thorne called. "Needs a word. Will catch you in the staff lot." To Brooks, this was unremarkable. In a world of informants and back-channel information, a quiet word in the parking lot was just another part of the job. She filed it away mentally as one last task before heading home, another loose end to be tied. The detail was so minor, so routine, it would never even be mentioned in the initial missing person report. Her final entry in the precinct log was clinical. End of watch, 2100 hours. As she walked through the heavy doors into the humid Louisiana night, her thoughts were on the next day's patrol route. She was unaware that her watch had truly and permanently ended. The countdown, silent and unnoticed by all, had just reached 0. In the New Orleans of 1986, few names commanded more respect than Christian Doyle. To the public, he was a titan of the law, a defense attorney whose courtroom oratory could transform hardened criminals into victims of circumstance. His charisma was a local institution. He was a philanthropist, a patron of the arts, a man whose wealth was matched only by his carefully cultivated image as a pillar of the community. He was seen at every major charity gala, his name etched onto the brass plaques of hospital wings and university libraries. Behind the philanthropic facade, however, was a different reality. Doyle's reputation among prosecutors was one of ruthless efficiency. His specialty was the impossible case, the airtight prosecution that would suddenly, inexplicably, fall apart in court. His client list was a who's who of the city's organized crime figures, men who walked free time and again, shielded by Doyle's legal brilliance. Whispers followed these acquittals, rumors of intimidated witnesses and compromised juries, but they were always just that, whispers, easily dismissed as the bitter complaints of the defeated. The public saw the elegant lawyer, the criminal underworld saw the architect of their freedom. In the weeks leading up to that February night, Doyle spent his evenings not in law libraries, but in a private, soundproofed study at his Garden District mansion. There, surrounded by meticulously arranged collections, he would review files unrelated to his public cases. These were dossiers on jurors, court clerks, and even judges, maps of their debts, their vices, their vulnerabilities. It was a library of human weakness, and he was its master librarian. Unbeknownst to him, a new reader was about to stumble into his library. Officer Lauren Brooks, investigating a routine string of burglaries, had followed a thread that led her away from petty thieves and toward the city courthouse. A low-level informant, trying to bargain his way out of a charge, had mentioned a court bailiff who could make legal problems disappear for the right price. Brooks, driven by an instinct she couldn't ignore, began to dig quietly, compiling notes in a separate, unofficial file. She was building a case, brick by painstaking brick, without realizing the foundation she was uncovering belonged to Christian Doyle's empire. The bailiff's name was Marcus Thorne. He was a courthouse fixture, a burly, unremarkable man who had served for 20 years, known for his gruff demeanor and little else. He was a ghost in the machine of justice, perfectly positioned to be Doyle's instrument. He was the one who delivered cash-filled envelopes, the one who made whispered threats in courthouse corridors, the one who ensured Doyle's courtroom strategies were never left to chance. On the morning of February 12th, Christian Doyle attended a breakfast fundraiser where he publicly praised the bravery and integrity of the New Orleans Police Department. That afternoon, according to telephone records that would not be examined for another 3 decades, he placed a call to a courthouse extension line. The call to Marcus Thorne lasted 52 seconds. It was all the time that was needed to set an ambush. At 2105 hours, Officer Lauren Brooks pushed open the heavy steel door to the gated staff parking lot. The air was cool and carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine from a nearby fence. Under the weak yellow glow of the sodium vapor lamps, the rows of department-issue sedans sat in silent, familiar order. This was a sanctuary, the one place a cop was supposed to be untouchable. The only sound was the distant wail of a siren, a city's constant, mournful song. From the shadows between a patrol car and an unmarked vehicle, a figure emerged. It was Marcus Thorne, the court bailiff. His presence wasn't alarming. It was expected. "Officer Brooks," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The watch commander asked me to give you a message. Something sensitive. Over here, where we won't be seen." He gestured toward the far end of the lot, a poorly lit corner near the brick wall. Trusting the uniform and the institution it represented, Brooks followed him. It was a fatal miscalculation, born of a discipline that taught her to respect the chain of command, even in its informal extensions. As they reached the darkened corner, Thorne stopped. "He said to tell you," he began, and as Brooks turned her head slightly to listen, his arm moved in a swift, brutal arc. There was no shout, no struggle. The only sound was a dense, sickening thud, like a heavy book falling shut, as a weighted sap struck the base of her skull. Her body went limp instantly, a marionette whose strings had been severed. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hum of the parking lot lights. Thorne worked with a chilling efficiency. He hoisted her slight frame over his shoulder and carried her to a dark, nondescript sedan parked along the fence, a vehicle that belonged to neither the department nor to him. A nearby security camera, positioned to cover that very corner, would be found the next day to have been offline for maintenance, a coincidence no one at the time questioned. He placed her in the trunk, closed it softly, and drove out of the police precinct parking lot. No one saw him leave. The final destination was less than 3 miles away, the Audubon golf course, shrouded in the deep silence of the night. Thorne drove the car to a service path near the infamous 17th hole. The spot had been chosen with care, a deep, punitive sand trap known as the Gold Trap, surrounded by old oak trees that blocked the view from the road. The grave had been dug hours earlier, a shallow trench in the soft, forgiving sand. Thorne was not alone for the final act. Christian Doyle stepped from the deeper shadows of the oak trees, his expensive shoes making no sound on the soft turf. He watched impassively as Thorne placed Lauren's body in the grave. Then, Doyle knelt down. From his pocket, he produced a small object, glinting in the faint moonlight. It was a single, hand-painted tin soldier, a French grenadier. With the detached precision of a collector arranging a display, he opened Lauren's cooling hand and carefully placed the soldier within her fingers, closing them around it. It was a signature, a message understood only by him. The whole operation, from the moment Thorne approached her to the moment the last layer of sand covered the grave, took less than 30 minutes. When investigators arrived the next morning, drawn by the sight of her solitary locked car, the scene was pristine. The only thing out of place was the absence of its owner. The house of law enforcement had been breached, but the walls themselves told no tales. The discovery of Officer Lauren Brooks's car on the morning of February 13th triggered a wave of confusion that quickly hardened into institutional panic. An officer vanishing from the very heart of their own precinct was not just a crime. It was an insult, a profound violation that struck at the core of the department's identity. The first 48 hours were a flurry of chaotic activity. The parking lot was sealed, a meticulous grid search was conducted, and every officer who had been on duty was questioned and re-questioned. But the investigation was paralyzed by a perfect void of evidence. There were no signs of a struggle, no ransom calls, no witnesses. It was as if the damp New Orleans air had simply dissolved her. Into this vacuum of facts stepped Christian Doyle. He presented himself to the beleaguered police chief not as a suspect, but as a concerned citizen and an officer of the court, offering his expertise pro bono to assist the department in this difficult time. It was a masterful stroke of audacity. Granted access to the periphery of the investigation, he didn't plant evidence, he planted ideas. In quiet conversations with high-ranking, overwhelmed officials, he masterfully sowed the seeds of a new narrative, one that shifted the blame away from departmental failure and onto the victim herself. He spoke of the immense pressures on young officers, especially women in a male-dominated force. He hinted at whispers he'd overheard in the courthouse, unsubstantiated rumors of an affair with a married superior, of a clandestine meeting gone wrong. Then came his most potent fabrication, the suggestion that Brooks was about to be exposed by internal affairs for corruption and had chosen to flee rather than face disgrace. This lie was particularly insidious because it preyed upon the department's deepest anxieties and provided a convenient, if shameful, explanation. The investigation, desperate for a tangible lead, seized on a more conventional suspect. A violent felon Brooks had recently arrested, a man who had openly threatened her in court. The department poured its resources into this theory, tracking the man's known associates and alibis. It was a comfortable, familiar path, far easier to pursue than the terrifying alternative that the threat had come from within the system. While detectives spent weeks chasing this ghost, Doyle's poisonous narrative took root within the precinct. The talk in the squad rooms changed. Lauren Brooks, the bright and respected officer, was posthumously transformed into a cautionary tale, a dirty cop, a runaway, a problem of her own making. Ultimately, the felon was proven to have been in another state on an unrelated charge the night Brooks disappeared. But by then, the damage was done. The official momentum was lost, and the unofficial narrative had solidified. With no body and no credible leads, the department was under immense public pressure to provide an answer. The answer they chose was silence. The official conclusion was as vague as it was final. Officer Brooks is believed to have abandoned her post for reasons unknown. The case, a source of profound institutional embarrassment, was quietly transferred to the inactive files. The lie had provided cover, and the truth, like Lauren's body, was buried. The years folded over one another, burying the memory of Lauren Brooks under the weight of new headlines and fresh tragedies. Within the New Orleans Police Department, her name became a whispered legend, a ghost story told to rookies about the dangers of the job and the fragility of a career. Her official file, thick with dead-end leads and retracted theories, gathered dust in a forgotten corner of the evidence archives. The city, with its unique capacity for both remembering and forgetting, moved on. On the Audubon golf course, life continued its leisurely, unbothered rhythm. For more than 3 decades, thousands of golfers played the 17th hole. They swore at the gold trap, its deep face and soft sand swallowing errant shots. They paced its surface, swung their clubs in frustration, and raked the sand smooth, all while standing just feet above a police officer's makeshift tomb. Seasons changed. The oak trees grew thicker, their long shadows stretching across the bunker. Hurricane winds tore through the city, but the sand held its secret, a silent, patient guardian of the crime. While the place of her burial became a stage for trivial recreation, the architect of her death ascended to the highest echelons of New Orleans society. Christian Doyle's career transitioned seamlessly from law to legacy building. He became the city's foremost philanthropist, his name adorning museum wings and university lecture halls. He sat on the boards of hospitals and charities, an elder statesman whose past as a ruthless defense attorney was spoken of only with a kind of nostalgic reverence for his former brilliance. He had a wife, children, and eventually grandchildren. He was the picture of civic virtue. In the quiet of his mansion, his victory was commemorated in a private climate-controlled study. There, his collection of military miniatures stood in perfect, gleaming rows. It was a museum of conquest, of meticulously planned campaigns. In the center of it all, a set of French grenadiers stood at attention, a testament to his obsession with Napoleonic strategy. There was a single conspicuous gap in their formation, a space waiting for a soldier that would never return. For 33 years, Christian Doyle lived a life of public honor, his one perfect crime serving as the silent, unshakable foundation of his empire. In the sweltering August of 2019, the Audubon golf course was a landscape of disruption. The gentle quiet of the fairways was replaced by the roar of diesel engines and the mechanical groan of heavy equipment. A long overdue renovation project was underway, intended to modernize the historic course. For 33 years, the 17th hole's gold trap had tormented golfers. Now, it was scheduled to be completely reshaped. The trigger for justice was not a confession or a guilty conscience, but the unthinking bite of a steel bucket into soft earth. A backhoe operator tasked with deepening the bunker felt a sudden, jarring halt. Expecting a large root or a buried rock, he repositioned the machine's arm and dug again. This time, he brought up a tangle of earth and something else, something pale and unmistakably bone. The work stopped. The site was cordoned off. The past, in a cascade of sand, began to spill into the present. The forensics team worked for hours under the harsh Louisiana sun, carefully brushing away the decades. The discovery of uniform fragments and a corroded police-issue badge confirmed the unthinkable. Dental records would later provide the name, but everyone in the department already knew. They had found Lauren Brooks. The news ripped through the NOPD, a shockwave from a forgotten earthquake. But the most profound discovery came not from the bones themselves, but from what they held. An anthropologist, delicately cleaning the skeletal right hand, found something clutched in the phalanges, a small, exquisitely detailed tin soldier. It was a 19th century French grenadier, its painted uniform faded but intact, preserved perfectly by the sand. It was an object of such deliberate strangeness, so alien to the scene, that it could only be a message. The case file, dormant for a generation, was pulled from the archives. It landed on the desk of Detective Douglas Pembroke of the Cold Case Unit. Pembroke was a veteran now, his face a map of long, hard years on the force. But in 1986, he had been a rookie, briefly partnered with Lauren Brooks. He had admired her, learned from her, and had always been haunted by her disappearance and the ugly rumors that followed. He never believed the official story. For him, the discovery was not just a professional duty, it was a personal reckoning. As he stared at the photograph of the tiny soldier resting in an evidence tray, he saw not a random trinket, but the first crack in a wall of silence that had stood for 33 years. Detective Douglas Pembroke approached the resurrected case not with the weary cynicism of a cold case veteran, but with the quiet intensity of someone settling a 33-year-old debt. He dismissed the faded, ink-stained theories from the original file, the affair, the corruption, the flight from justice. He had known Lauren Brooks, and those narratives were a fiction crafted to mask a failure. His focus was singular: the tin soldier. It was too specific, too deliberate to be anything but a message. The new investigation would begin there, with the one clue that had waited 3 decades to speak. The first months were a frustrating exercise in due diligence. Pembroke and his small team had to methodically dismantle the original investigation's primary theory. They revisited the case of the violent felon who had threatened Brooks. They spent hundreds of hours digitizing old records, tracking down retired officers, and finally locating the man himself, now old and frail, in a federal prison in Oklahoma. Prison transfer records and logbooks provided an ironclad alibi. On the night of February 12, 1986, he was securely in a parish holding cell on a drunk and disorderly charge. The department's most promising lead for 33 years was a ghost. The case was at a standstill, and the pressure from upstairs to close the file and simply honor a fallen officer's memory began to mount. But Pembroke refused to let the trail go cold. He pivoted back to the soldier. Consulting with historians and niche collectors, he confirmed its rarity. It was part of a limited edition set, cast by a small French company in the late 1970s, expensive and sought after by only the most serious enthusiasts. This was not a child's toy. It was a rich man's hobby. Convinced the owner was local, Pembroke made a strategic gamble. He released a high-resolution image of the soldier to the New Orleans press, framing it as an appeal to the public to help identify a unique personal effect. The call came 3 days later. It was from a nurse at a retirement home in the suburbs. She was calling on behalf of an elderly resident, a woman whose memory was fading, but who had been lucidly stirred by the image in the newspaper. Her late husband had owned a specialty hobby shop in the French Quarter in the 80s. She remembered the soldier vividly. Her husband had sold the entire set to his best, most obsessive customer, a wealthy, charismatic lawyer who was fascinated with Napoleonic military strategy, a man who bought everything he had on the subject. Pembroke drove to the nursing home that afternoon. The woman's voice was thin, but her memory on this one subject was crystal clear. She remembered the lawyer's courtesy, his expensive suits, and the name he had signed on the checks. It was a name that had defined New Orleans for a generation: Christian Doyle. Suddenly, all the disparate pieces of the puzzle began to snap into place. Pembroke pulled the old courthouse records, noting the frequent professional contact between Doyle and the bailiff, Marcus Thorne. He cross-referenced the mob-connected clients Doyle had successfully defended against the minor burglary cases Brooks was investigating just before she vanished. For the first time, Pembroke saw the elegant architecture of the crime. The rumors that had destroyed Lauren's reputation hadn't just appeared, they had been planted. And the man who planted them was the same man who collected tiny, perfect soldiers. Armed with the widow's testimony, Detective Pembroke secured a search warrant for Christian Doyle's Garden District estate. The execution of the warrant was a quiet, methodical affair, a stark contrast to the opulence it invaded. While uniformed officers conducted a systematic search of the main house, Pembroke went straight to the private study his research had indicated. Behind a false wall of antique books, he found it. A small, climate-controlled room, a vault dedicated to military history. Thousands of miniature soldiers stood in perfect glass cases, silent armies from forgotten wars. In the center of the room, on a velvet-lined pedestal, was the Napoleonic French grenadier set. And in the front rank, there was a single, empty brass slot, a dark gap in an otherwise perfect formation. This was powerful, but a good lawyer, and Doyle was the best, could still explain it away. Pembroke needed something that could not be dismissed. He went back to the hobby shop owner's widow, asking if her husband had kept any business records. After searching through dusty boxes in her attic, she found it. A thick, leather-bound sales ledger from 1978 to 1987. Pembroke spent hours turning the brittle, yellowed pages, his finger tracing columns of dates and sales. And then he found it. An entry from May 1982. The script was a neat, practiced cursive. Sold, 1 complete set, French Grenadiers, Lefebvre, limited edition. Next to it was the price, a staggering sum for the time. And in the final column, designated for the buyer, C. Doyle. It was the receipt for the calling card left in a murdered officer's hand. The interrogation took place in a small, windowless room at headquarters, a world away from Doyle's curated existence. At 79, Christian Doyle was still formidable. He sat opposite Pembroke, not with the fear of a suspect, but with the weary condescension of a monarch being inconvenienced by a palace guard. His posture was perfect, his voice calm and steady. He politely denied knowing Lauren Brooks beyond her name in the papers, dismissed any connection to Marcus Thorne as purely professional, and treated Pembroke's questions as the sad, desperate grasping of a man chasing ghosts. Pembroke let him speak, letting the wall of denial and aristocratic confidence build itself, brick by brick. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. When Doyle had finished, Pembroke slid a single photograph across the steel table. It showed the display case with the one empty slot. Doyle glanced at it and chuckled softly. "I'm a collector, detective. Sometimes pieces get lost." Then Pembroke placed the ledger on the table, open to the damning entry. Doyle's smile tightened, but he held his composure. A purchase made years before, hardly a smoking gun. Finally, Pembroke placed a small, clear evidence bag in the center of the table. Inside, the tin soldier lay on a bed of white cotton. He said nothing. The effect was not loud, but it was total. Doyle stared at the tiny figure, the last grenadier, returned from its long post. For a full minute, the only sound was the hum of the ventilation. The formidable intellect behind his eyes seemed to flicker and dim. The mask didn't shatter, it simply dissolved, revealing the hollowed-out thing that had lived behind it for 3 decades. The king was checkmated, not by an army, but by a single, forgotten pawn. The arrest of Christian Doyle sent a seismic shock through New Orleans. The story was a media firestorm, a story so potent it felt like fiction. The city's most revered philanthropist unmasked as the architect of a 33-year-old murder of a police officer. Friends, colleagues, and the beneficiaries of his endless charity expressed stunned disbelief. The man who had built hospitals and funded scholarships was now accused of a crime whose cold-bloodedness was breathtaking. The press besieged the courthouse, turning the pre-trial hearings into a public spectacle. For the surviving members of Lauren Brooks's family, a younger brother who now lived in Texas, and a handful of elderly cousins, the news was a painful, disorienting validation. For decades, they had lived with the quiet shame of the official narrative, the whispered rumors of her disgrace. Now, the truth had finally emerged, but it was a truth wrapped in the bitterness of stolen years and a life cut brutally short. Their relief was palpable, but it was a heavy, somber thing, a justice born from a grave that should never have been dug. Within the New Orleans Police Department, the reaction was one of profound institutional soul-searching. Retired officers who had worked the original case came forward, expressing regret and a deep, abiding guilt for having so readily accepted the slander against one of their own. The department publicly and formally apologized to Lauren's family, posthumously clearing her name and restoring her honor with the highest departmental commendations. Her academy portrait, long relegated to a storage room, was returned to the wall of honored officers. The legal proceedings promised to be the trial of the century. Pembroke's case, built on the twin pillars of the tin soldier and the sales ledger, was methodical and airtight. He had leveraged the evidence to pressure former associates of Doyle, uncovering a hidden trail of financial records that connected Doyle to Marcus Thorne in ways that went far beyond their professional relationship at the courthouse. But the trial that everyone was waiting for would never happen. 2 weeks before jury selection was set to begin, Christian Doyle was found dead in his jail cell. Unwilling to face the public demolition of the legacy he had so meticulously constructed, he had hanged himself. He left behind a single, handwritten note on his bedside table. It contained only one sentence, a final cryptic confession. The soldier has returned to his post. Christian Doyle's final act was not one of remorse, but of control. His death in a jail cell was the last calculated move in a life built on managing outcomes, a final refusal to allow his legacy to be publicly dismantled by others. He left no explanation, no apology, only the cryptic finality of his one-sentence note. In the end, his vast fortune and towering reputation dissolved into nothing, a footnote to the story of the young officer whose life he had extinguished to protect his own ambition. The gold trap bunker at the Audubon golf course is no longer a feature on the scorecard. After a brief, morbid period where it became an unofficial tourist attraction, the sand trap was permanently filled in. The ground was leveled, seeded with grass, and now differs from the surrounding fairway only by the presence of a small, simple bronze plaque set flush with the earth. It bears no elaborate eulogy, only a name, a badge number, and 2 dates. It marks not a grave, but the final resting place of a 33-year-long lie. The Tin Soldier, the story's silent witness, was eventually released from the evidence vault. Detective Pembroke, in one of his last acts before retirement, took the small figure not to a museum, but to the memorial display case in the lobby of the 3rd Precinct. There, among the polished medals, folded flags, and faded photographs of other fallen officers, the French Grenadier now stands its final watch. It is no longer a clue, but a symbol, a testament to a debt finally paid. The story of Officer Lauren Brooks serves as a chilling testament that the most formidable walls are not built of brick or stone, but of time and silence. It reminds us that a hero's honor can be buried by a well-told lie, and a killer can wear the mask of a saint for a lifetime. But it also proves that truth is patient. It can lie dormant for decades, held in the cold, closed fist of the dead, waiting for a single chance crack in the wall to finally bring an empire of deceit crashing to the ground.